Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of February of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. According to media and according to Zelensky, Ukraine and Zelensky himself are ready for talks, are ready for a peaceful settlement of the conflict. But the question is whether the president of Ukraine indeed is ready for this process, or he's just trying to postpone the upcoming combined massive missile and drone attack that most likely is going to happen even probably this upcoming night between the 11th and the 12th of February of 2026. As of now, it's very difficult to understand and to answer this question. According to media, Ukraine under US pressure is urgently preparing a referendum on peace with Russia and a presidential election. Kiev has begun planning to hold the presidential election and referendum on possible peace agreements with Russia. According to the publication, both votes could take place before May 15th. This step is being taken under pressure from the US administration. Furthermore, France Today claims that Zelensky plans to announce the elections on the referendum on the February 24th. The Trump administration wants not only the elections in Ukraine to be held by May 15th, but also the implementation of the entire package of peace agreements, including the withdrawal of the Ukrainian armed forces from Donbas. At the same time, all these plans could be derailed if Kiev refuses to withdraw troops from Donbas. I'm not sure where exactly France Today is taking their information, but there are two important things that we need to understand. First of all, there is a martial law and mobilization in Ukraine, and this, let's say, stage and this phase of mobilization martial law ends just in May of 2026, so in 3 months. Another important thing is that Ukraine is not allowed to hold referendums or president elections during the martial law, which means that first of all, Zelensky and the parliament of Ukraine either should cancel the martial law or they need to adopt a law that will allow them to make referendum and to hold elections during this period of time. So once again, we believe that all these publications, all these statements made by media have just one purpose: to postpone the upcoming, probably an inevitable strike from the Russian side. And you know that this upcoming strike is most likely is going to be very powerful from the Russian side, because the Russians have already changed their tactics. So everybody was expecting that the Russians are going to attack Ukraine within the upcoming nights between the 11th and the 12th of February, or probably between the 12th and the 13th of February. But the Russians attacked Ukraine today. That attack wasn't the biggest attack or something like this. We just received the report that the Russian military struck a 750 substation in the Lviv region with Kinzhal hypersonic missiles from a MiG-31 fighter jet. The sources reported that the Russians used 5 hypersonic missiles to attack this substation in the most western parts of Ukraine. The Ukrainian sources are saying that they managed to bring down 2 missiles of this type. I would like to remind you that this substation is a very important one. This is basically a critical substation for Ukraine, because Ukraine uses this substation to connect Europe and, let's say, the entire Ukraine. So if Ukraine suffers problems with energy supply, with power stations, with Russian missile strikes, and if the Ukrainians have no possibilities to generate power by themselves, they begin importing power and electricity from the European countries, and Ukrainians use this substation for these purposes. So every time when the Russians attack the territory of Ukraine, the Ukrainians are trying to reduce the capacities and capabilities of their power stations in favor of importing of power from the European countries. So that is why the Russians first attack this substation with the purpose to understand and to see what the Ukrainians are going to do next, and to understand where to attack when the Ukrainians are completely cut from the European countries. And now the Russians will attack the energy objects and infrastructure through Ukraine after this situation with 750 substation. So which means that most likely in coming night the Russians will do this. Anyway, let's wait and see. So now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very important updates. And first we're going to talk about the Zaporizhzhia area. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked an object of critical infrastructure in this area as well. The Russians attacked the substation in the southern parts of the city. This video was published during the previous night, and here we can see a fire. Here we can see explosions. The Russians attacked this object of critical infrastructure because during the previous and several days ago, the Ukrainians launched a counter-offensive operation in this region with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. So this is the reason why the Russians attacked this substation. They basically tried to collapse, they tried to destroy the, let's say not to destroy, they tried to force the Ukrainians or they were trying to cut the main logistic, the main supply lines and so on. So let's discuss now in details what happened during the previous 24 hours. And first let's talk about the western Zaporizhzhia direction. As you can see, according to this configuration of the map has been adjusted significantly. This is the end of the 10th of February and this is the end of the 11th of February. According to different mappers, according to, first of all, pro-Ukrainian sources, according to neutral mappers, the armed forces of Ukraine carried out a successful counter-offensive operation that allowed them to force the Russians to fall back from the territory to the north of the city of Stepnogorsk. The Ukrainians, as you can see, according to these changes, according to pro-Ukrainian sources and neutral mappers, just during the previous probably 3 or 5 days, managed to recapture the villages of Richne, Lukyanovskaya, Novoboykovskaya and Novoyakovlevskaya. So, of course, from this perspective, we see that it seems that Ukrainians managed to improve their positions significantly, but from the other side, we see that Ukrainians still haven't managed to approach the main defense line between the villages of Primorskaya that goes through the village of Primorskaya, Stepnogorsk, and further in the eastern direction. We are talking about these yellow lines. So this is a very powerful stronghold, very powerful defense line. The Ukrainians have just approached this line and the main battle is just ahead of us. And you know that today we received another very important article. Several neutral sources and pro-Ukrainian sources published a picture, this one, where we can see at least 2 Ukrainian soldiers that raised a flag, that raised the Ukrainian flag. And according to these, let's say, constructions, several centers managed to gelocate these positions. And according to these, let's say, analysis, the Ukrainians raised the flag somewhere at this point. So, of course, based on this picture, we are not going to change anything. We want to see a video, but there are very high chances that in coming hours we will color everything to the north of this point, because indeed the Ukrainians, as a result of this counter-offensive operation, managed to recapture huge territories. So this is the Zaporizhzhia counter-offensive operation, and I would like to remind you once again that Ukrainians are trying to improve their positions significantly before the beginning of the major battle for the city of Zaporizhzhia itself. The Russians finished the creation and finished the preparation of reserves for this offensive operation that most likely is going to start and last during the spring and summer military campaigns. This is going to be the main military campaign of 2026. The battle for the city of Zaporizhzhia. At the same time, we start receiving a lot of updates from the Orekhov direction. We have small changes. Pro-Ukrainian sources published a video where we can see how Ukrainians of 65th Mechanized Brigade were attacking positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation in the southern part of the settlement of Avdiivka on the territory of these farms. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. This is the situation by the end of the 9th, this is the 10th, and this is the 11th of February of 2026. Furthermore, we start receiving lots of updates of how Russians were attacking and hunting positions of the armed forces of Ukraine further in the northeastern direction towards the settlement of Orekhov itself. As for the city of Orekhov, we received also lots of videos of how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the central part of the city through these, let's say, multi-story buildings. And it seems that the Russians have begun artillery preparation before the beginning of a major attempt attempt from the Russian side to break through Ukraine's defense completely and to answer the city of Orekhov, at least from several directions. So it seems that the battle for Orekhov is going to start very soon, and maybe this is the explanation why the Ukrainians launched their counter-offensive operation in the western Zaporizhzhia direction, just with the purpose to force the Russians to distract their attentions and to force the Russians to postpone a major part of the battle for this city. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that the clashes are still ongoing on the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Ukrainians are trying to force the Russians to fall back from the Ukrainian side of the river of Gaichur. During the previous 24 hours, the map has been adjusted once again. This is the situation by the end of the 8th, this is the 9th, this is the 10th, and this is the 11th of February of 2026. The Ukrainians continue counter-offensive operation. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for a small village by the name of Kosivtsevo, which is located to the south of the settlement of Ternovata. But once again, I would like to point to attention that despite reports that were published by pro-Ukrainian sources, there are still Russian soldiers in the area of Ternovata, Kosivtsevo. There are very heavy clashes, and the Ukrainians are trying to block these contingent and then to move slowly, step by step, through every single building. At the same time, the Russians continue maintaining their positions along the territory to the west of the city of Gulyai-Polya. The Russians control the city of Zalizhnishne. The Russians improve their position significantly around the settlement of Stara Ukrainka, and the Russians continue advancing further along the railways with the purpose to get as close as possible to the settlement of Verkhnya Tersa. So while the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack in the area of Ternovata, the Russians are trying to continue offensive operation in the area of the Verkhnya Tersa, which will open an operational space to outflank the Ukrainians in the area of Avdiivka and Razdvyanka, and to continue offensive operation in the southwestern directions towards the city of Orekhov. So now it's the most decisive part of the battle for the city of Zaporizhzhia. It's something like the battle when both sides are trying to get their start positions before the beginning of the major offensive operation. It's not the major battle, it's not the major offensive operation, neither from Ukrainian nor from the Russian side. It's just the battle for the start position of the spring military campaign, which is a very important thing, because it is very important for Russians to start the spring offensive operation on the Ukrainian side of the river of Gaichur, but not on the Russian side. And the same thing for Ukrainians. It is very important to start the spring battle for the city of Zaporizhzhia on the Russian side of the river of Gaichur, but not on the Ukrainian side. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 hours, the map has been adjusted. This is the end of the 10th and this is the end of the 11th of February. As you can see, the settlement of Grishina was adjusted. We added additional gray zone according to pro-Ukrainian sources. And now, according to all these changes, we see that the Russians were spotted through the 50% of the settlement of Grishina, and the Russians continue advancing, sending more and more sabotage and reconnaissance groups further in the northwestern direction. It seems that we are observing the probably the decisive and the turning point in the battle for the settlement. This battle started several months ago, and the Ukrainians were trying to keep control over the settlement for as long as possible. But we see that despite attempts from the Ukrainian side, the Russians are getting the northwestern part of the settlement, and most likely this is going to happen very soon. As for the Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything. The Russians continued attacking positions and vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area, but as you can see, without almost any changes on the ground. There is just one small update that was made to the west of the settlement of Ivanopolia, based on the video published by pro-Ukrainian sources, where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking positions of Russians at this point. So nothing special. There is still a very huge gap between the geolocated Russian positions and the city of Konstantinovka itself. But we can't say the same thing about the Sloviansk direction. We see that the Russian offensive operation is intensifying in this area, and during the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the map has been adjusted significantly. This is the end of the 10th of February, and this is the end of the 11th of February. As you can see, the Russians are keeping advancing along MO3 road, and almost every single day we adjust the map in Russian favor. So these are the changes on the ground between something like 10 or something like 7 or 10 days, and the Russians, as you can see, managed to capture or to answer the most fortified area of the armed forces of Ukraine to the south of Fyodorovka Druga. We came to this conclusion based on the reports that were published by pro-Ukrainian sources and neutral mappers. The Russians are keeping advancing, and it seems that the battle for the settlement of Fyodorovka Druga is about to start. Most likely the Russians will begin offensive operation in this area within the next 2 or 3 days. When the Russians finish the battle for this territory, then the Russians will begin offensive operation further in the northern directions towards the settlement of Alexandrovka. But there are some chances that the Russians may try to cross the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal and to check and to try the Ukraine's defense in the direction of the city of Kramatorsk. Because who knows what is the status of Ukraine's defense and what Russia's capabilities. Maybe they know something, and maybe they will try to advance in the western direction despite this dense network of the fortifications. Everything is possible. And of course, if this breakthrough happens, I'm not even sure what the Ukrainians are going to do with this, if everything is possible once again. As for the Liman direction, nothing special. As for the Kupyansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of important updates. The Russians, according to information we have, improved their positions to the east of the settlement of Kivsharovka, and based on the reports we are receiving right now, it seems that the battle for the eastern bank of the river Oskol is coming to its logical end, despite the numerous numbers of attacks from the Ukrainian side that have been carried out since the beginning of November. We see that the Russians are finishing the battle, and we see that there are less and less square kilometers under complete Ukraine's control. And the Ukrainians understand when the Russians finish the battle for the city of Kupyansk and for the eastern bank of the river Oskol in this part of the front line, then the Russians most likely will use the released forces to continue offensive operation in the Barova direction, and they will continue advancing further on the Ukrainian side of the river of Oskol with the purpose to restore control over the positions the Russians lost during the Ukrainian Kharkiv counter-offensive operation of the 2022. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. Probably several interesting updates and geolocations were received from the Sumy region. The Russians began using FPV drones along the second defense line, and telling the truth, there is a small spoiler. Right before I start making the video, pro-Ukrainian sources published a video of how they were attacking Russians somewhere at this forest. So the map will be adjusted tomorrow significantly, and the Russians, according to the latest updates, managed to approach the next defense layer, and which means that the Russians are getting closer and closer to the city of Sumy itself, and we see that currently the Ukrainians are not able to do anything with these Russian advances. And that's it for today. Military with Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.